Hello and welcome to today's webinar, Savings and Risk, the Rise of Analytics for Procurement. At this point, I would now like to introduce Konstantin Liberakis, Director of Product Marketing at Determine. Konstantin?
Lori, thank you so much for that introduction, and we really appreciate you joining us for this topic that is one that we've seen increasingly become one at the top of everybody's agenda in 2016 and even late last year and a few years into that. And what we do, and what we're seeing here is this idea of savings and risk and this rise of analytics has just become something that is really unavoidable for most folks in procurement and business and in general. And what we wanted to do here today is really invite some folks that we work with and we're affiliated with that will help us tell the story from the Determine perspective of what we think this rise of analytics is attributed to and what's causing our need to want to focus more on this topic. So we have a great panel in front of us here that I'm going to present to you, and I'll go one by one here just to kind of do that so you know who's familiar, who becomes familiar in the virtual room, so to speak. And get started here with a colleague or a person I've known for quite some time, Andrew Bartolini, Chief Research Officer of Ardent Partners. Andrew, welcome to the webinar here, joining us from Boston, correct?
I am, Konstantin. Thanks for having me. Hello, everybody.
I'd like to next also introduce Lou Galczynski, who's been a client of IASTA and then Determine for several years. He's a senior manager, strategic sourcing at Endo Endo International, and we wanted to bring Lou on here to give us his perspective of how they're using our platform and what analytics means to them. So, Lou, you're joining us from, I believe, outside of Philly, correct?
That's correct, Konstantin. Hello, everybody. I'm certainly glad to be here today.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And then finally, I have Bill DeMartino, who I work with almost on a daily basis here. He's our SVP of Corporate Strategy at Determine, who's also joining us from Boston and is going to espouse on us some of the perspectives from the Determine point of view, so to speak, of what we're doing with analytics and how that's impacting our technology. So, Bill, welcome today on the webinar.
Thanks, Konstantin, and good day, all.
All right, and then finally, again, I'm Konstantin. I'm going to be your host today for this webinar. And again, as you can read from everybody's respective background, we certainly are passionate about this topic respectively from where we're coming from. And we really want to give our point of view here and impose on you folks joining us on the webinar just some idea of what we see happening in the world of procurement and analytics more specifically. So with that, I'd like to move on to the actual topic. But before I do that, just to do a brief introduction of Determine. For those of you who know the name and may not be familiar with the name, Determine became a new name for our business late last year. It was brought together from the strengths of IASTA and Selectica and BPAC, and today we are a global company traded on the NASDAQ with over 300 clients all over the world, recognized by analysts with thousands of users in the source-to-pay continuum. And we also work with a number of different partners in technology and consulting, and as a technology platform in the cloud, we provide source-to-pay, and we provide that in a number of different ways and different avenues and provide the flexibility for enterprise users to use our products. And as part of that, analytics is a key component. It's a key element of why people, organizations, procurement, sourcing, accounts payable, all the users of source-to-pay are needing better tools for analytics. So with that, what's our agenda? What do we want to talk about? The first point of view I want to share is really some of the challenges and opportunity we see within analytics and more specifically procurement analytics. We want to then also share a little bit of the research that Andrew has with his team at Ardent on what he's seeing from the standpoint of analytics in general. And then we want to use Lou as an example here at Endo from their point of view of being a case study of how our analytics, procurement analytics, affecting their organization. What is he seeing How is that impacting him as a pharmaceutical organization as well as and on the day-to-day. And then finally, we're going to give this over to Bill to give the technology perspective from Determined in terms of some of the trends that we're seeing in analytics and what we're anticipating in the coming months and years ahead as we continue to work in this space. So what are those challenges and opportunities? One of the things that, again, as I mentioned, is this has become a very hot topic, not just in procurement, but overall in general. And, you know, one of the things that we've seen is that people and organizations are really seeing the growth of data. Here we have the picture of Eric Schmidt, who's the executive chairman of Google, and just by reading the soundbite here, we can see that he's saying since the dawn of civilization until 2003, humankind generated 5 exabytes of data, and now we produce 5 exabytes every 2 days, and the pace is accelerating. So really this, I think, sets the tone appropriately in terms of understanding. You know, if we thought we had challenges before with data, this is only going to increase, and it's only going to become a bigger part of what we need to do within our respective organizations. And for procurement, this is going to be increasingly important in terms of getting a seat at the table and helping guide the organization to success. Here I wanted to just really pull just some of the statistics that are then out there with this big data idea in mind. Some of the things that we're noticing in the research that's out there. MIT Sloan Review and SAS Institute, they do a research every year, and they said that here 67% of companies of various sizes in many industries rely on analytics to gain a competitive advantage. And they're noting here is that since last year, this represented an 80% increase. So we're seeing that analytics has become much more part of the agenda for corporations. And then we're also seeing that 41% of companies, based on the IBM Institute research, they noted that they're benefiting from advanced analytics compared to only 16% of underperformers. Sometimes these are called laggards, or the others that are in the bunch. And so what this is telling us is that, again, getting a competitive advantage, being able to really benefit from the insights is something that organizations are yearning to do and try to do it better. Finally, what we're seeing based on the Wall Street Journal's survey, they said that 51% of respondents believe some type of predictive analytics derived from what they know of big data is providing more precision in terms of the risk assessment. And we're seeing that that's going towards the supplier. And this is a topic that we'll talk about as part of the webinar. But what we're also seeing is that not everybody is doing it as effectively as the best in class. So only 31% are currently using predictive analytics in the manner according to their survey. So that there's a lot of room for growth for organizations to do this better and to try to make a better approach to how analytics is impacting them. So with that, there's a lot of data out there, a lot of research out there, and what we want to do is provide now an outlet for Andrew here from Ardent to talk about what their findings are from the Ardent perspective. And I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to you, Andrew. So Andrew, share some insights from the our Ardent point of view.
Great. Thanks, Constantine. Next slide. I think you're absolutely right. The amount of data is only increasing within procurement organizations. The importance of being able to derive value from it also only increasing. Right? Procurement organizations, large and small, they're just simply awash in multiple data streams that flood their systems from both internal and external sources. And this ends up drowning CPOs and their teams in information, and it makes it harder to make effective business decisions. Aggregating, cleansing, and analyzing key forms of business intelligence like your spend, sourcing, contract, supplier, and risk data, and making critical decisions based on those analyses can be nearly impossible without the right processes and tools in place. Now, my part of today's presentation is going to look at the pressures and challenges that procurement teams experience while operating in a big data world, as well as the innovative solutions and strategies that can help many of them sift through data, avoid risks, cut costs, and realize greater savings for the larger enterprise. And I should mention it's also based upon a research report that is going to be newly published in the next day or two. But let's look at some of the research here. Next slide. I wanted to start today's presentation with a quote from a recent interview that I just conducted with a CPO who was talking about her department's direction for 2016. What are they focused on? And it just happened to fall very neatly into what we're talking about today, and that is savings or optimizing vendor value, managing risk, and pushing procurement to deliver the next level of value. In a very compacted way, this maps to the maturity of most procurement organizations and the progression of value that they deliver in general and the value that they derive from their data. So let's look at some of the pressures that CPOs are facing with this slide here, right? So savings. So the top CPO business pressure today presents an interesting trend over the past couple of years, right? Savings remains the top business pressure for procurement teams, but that pressure is receding. Now, we think that there are many factors at play here, and this is tied at some level to where we are in the business cycle, but this is also linked to the expanded view of procurement value and what procurement organizations can deliver to the larger enterprise, right? Procurement does many more things beyond savings, of course, right? Let's look at the next slide, right? It manages risk. Right, and it tries to manage risk, it tries to mitigate risk, it tries to, really first and foremost to identify where risk occurs, and what we see here are the top strategies of procurement organizations in their approach to supply risk, and what we see is that the level of sophistication in supply risk management is not necessarily where we'd ideally like it to be, but we have organizations primarily focused on simply defining their programs and defining the metrics that they're going to track and where we see the trends and why we think analytics will continue to rise in importance within procurement is that the tools and the analysis that is being used to capture the data is becoming more refined, and that there are opportunities to improve supply risk programs and really begin to take a more nuanced approach to the area, right? So supply risk. Let's look at adding more value. Next slide, right? From our perspective, spend under management is and remains probably the most important metric for procurement organizations to track, right? Now, certainly, savings is and continues to be the top procurement performance metric used by the larger organization, but we believe that spend under management is really a measure that should be tracked and really a number that should be increased as organizations continue to move forward. Spend under management looks at the percentage of total enterprise spend, your indirect, your direct, your services spend, all your third-party spend. Sometimes this includes CapEx for some organizations. That total spend, what's the percentage of procurement organizations are managing or influencing? And that's really, again, the opportunity to add value, to influence, right? You can't add value to what you're not managing. You can't add value to what you're not seeing. Our research has shown that for every dollar of spend that's brought under procurement's management, there's a benefit that's realized somewhere between 6 and 12% in the first sourcing cycle, which is about 3 years. Let's look to the next slide. Now, the challenge is you can't manage what you cannot see, right? Many CPOs and procurement teams find themselves at one or more data disadvantages, right? Like not tracking key procurement data or tracking and collecting, but struggling to aggregate multiple streams from disparate sources, or aggregating, cleansing, and enriching data, but not having the steps to convert that data into intelligence, into informed business decisions, and into real business value. Procurement's inability to overcome its distinct data disadvantages results in a dearth of understanding and really then presents challenges across several key performance metric areas, right? So what I'm showing you here in this graphic is the percentage of procurement organizations that have full visibility into these key areas, right? And it's somewhat surprising or shocking that less than 60% of organizations have a truly comprehensive view into the level of savings that they're delivering to their organizations, that they don't have full visibility into spend. And then you start to look at the next wave of key metrics, right? Contract compliance, right? And there, we did a webinar with this team last year and talking about contract compliance and its importance, right? If you're not realizing the value of your sourcing efforts, if you're not ensuring that your organizations are buying against the contracts that you've negotiated with your preferred suppliers, the highest value suppliers, the lowest risk suppliers, whatever the metrics are that you're managing towards within each of those distinct categories, you're eroding the value of the larger organization. And that really does bring the point to the next slide, and that is it's very difficult for procurement organizations to claim to be a strategic business function if they lack visibility into the underlying data, into the underlying metrics that really provide the foundation of what it is they should be doing, of what they should be prioritizing, where the highest value opportunities are, right? I'd say the vast majority of procurement organizations believe that they're understaffed and challenged to take on more with each growing year. And really simply boil it down that, CPOs who aren't leveraging spend analysis to drive their operations, to allocate resources, to drive value, sourcing leaders who aren't leveraging visibility into spend really are committing procurement malpractice. Now, let's move to the next slide, right? And I think that, Constantine really did hit upon it that, this expansive data, right? One of the great ironies of the digital era is that enterprises are collecting more and more data, and yet within the procurement context, many are unable to fully leverage this data and transform it into real value, right? And I think it's just good move to the next slide and talk at first by defining big data in a procurement context, right? So, the larger term big data really does speak to enterprise data drawn from multiple systems that require, huge integration efforts and in the context of how Ardent thinks about procurement's big data, right? We're an organization that only looks at the source to settle process. We really only focus in on supply management. There's a large amount of data that's being captured. There's a large amount of data that can be mined, and what we see is really just extraordinary opportunities for organizations to begin to aggregate the data, to begin to understand and prioritize what they're going to focus on, right? Just getting your hands around the data is a start, but you need to, again, begin to make some cuts and determine what's most important. But big data in the broader context of procurement really looks at data that's coming from the supply management systems that you're using, right? So spend analysis, your transactional systems like e-procurement, contracts, e-sourcing would also include your AP systems and the things that capture all of the transactions and supplier transactions that you have with your suppliers. But it also includes supplier data, right? So we talked about the spend data, but it includes performance data. It includes supplier information. As you start to become more advanced and begin to take a broader view of the fast-changing supply markets, right? It becomes much more important to begin to understand and integrate third-party data. That can be supplier specific, that can be category specific, that can be regional, region specific, and unstructured data as well, right? There are a lot of moving parts here, and organizations really do need to begin to start developing a plan, if they don't have one in place already, as to how they begin to manage this data, how they begin to take these streams, and again, convert it into value. Now, pivoting from here, right, we're going to talk about the rise of analytics and, really a couple of opportunities that we see in the future. The report stays a little bit more in the current state, but I thought it'd be sort of an interesting exercise to talk a little bit more about where we think the rise of analytics is ultimately going to take us. Right? I think Constantine showed some data about the level of predictive analysis that is expected in the marketplace, and we certainly are starting to see the development of algorithms and tools that can impact an organization in what it buys and from whom, and that by looking at historical demand, future demand can be better anticipated, and as a result, smarter decisions can be made. Let's look at the next slide here. Now, I've been very focused on sourcing for the past 17 years. Before I was an analyst, I actually managed about a little bit more than $500 million in sourcing projects, and almost all of them utilized e-sourcing. And when I look at our research, there's a couple areas that that show a lot of promise or opportunity, but at some level are a little bit depressing, right? First is the degree of visibility challenges that procurement organizations have in the marketplace today. The second is, didn't show you the data, but the second relates to the level of e-sourcing that occurs relative to the overall amount of sourcing projects. And so I ardently believe that e-sourcing is underutilized by most enterprises, but where it is utilized, there is this additional problem that most organizations take a relatively simplistic approach to how they utilize the tools. And so what do I mean by that? I mean that, sort of giving you the example today of the sourcing award decisions and those results, but tools really do exist today to do more sophisticated, comprehensive analysis of supplier bids, and these tools really do extend the value of e-sourcing. Let's look to the next slide, right? And sort of a bigger brain concept around the rise of analytics and the use of data is real-time optimization, right? When you start to look at the data streams that flow across your supply chains, the data can be overwhelming, but tools are being developed to begin to better parse through and analyze and capture this information and begin to make both predictive decisions, but also begin to make decisions that are optimized in a real-time format. So let's look at the next slide here. And so certainly, advanced optimization tools that are either part of or associated with e-sourcing is today that allows organizations to analyze large reams of supplier data and to make data-driven decisions, right? I mean, that's ultimately what we're talking about, right? Is how do we remove some of the qualitative decision-making from processes that really should be fully quantified, and we see opportunities in the future to begin to quantify the qualitative and sourcing events, but to also begin to capture data across your supply chains and begin to optimize them, right? Optimize them at the point of routing a PO to the supplier that has lower capacity. Routing a PO based upon points in time where there are pricing fluctuations, if that's how your contracts are scheduled. And ultimately, I think the point of the last couple of slides is not that most procurement organizations are doing this today, but really to get you to start to think about the promise and opportunity and potential that exists within the data that you're capturing today. And so I want to conclude with a few recommendations or strategies for success, and you can just go from here to the next slide. By and large, the average CPO and procurement team has considerable work to do to improve visibility into spend, sourcing, compliance, supplier management, and risk management, whether it's through greater process automation, standardization, linkage and solution adoption, or by providing visibility and intelligence and reaching across the hall or outside the organization to aid a stakeholder in need. There's still a lot of work to be done, right? And essentially the strategies I've laid out for you here boil down to linking your data to your processes, beginning to develop an expertise in data management, right? The money ball of sourcing, the money ball of procurement, right? There are data scientists, and the capabilities to be able to do a much more complex and a much more sophisticated analysis of data really does exist. The talent and capabilities don't exist within most procurement organizations today, but you need to start thinking about it. And then the final main point is really let's get ready for the future. It's going to be very exciting because procurement's big data presents a lot of challenges today, but those challenges really are converted into opportunities when you start to think about that. And so with that, Constantine, I'm going to pass it back to you.
All right. Thank you, Andrew, so much for that insight and the analysis. I think we're going to be coming back to some of your points and understanding that from the questions that we'll be getting from those attending. But you bring up a good way of understanding this in the context of procurement in the upstream side, on the sourcing side, that there's a lot that needs to be done, that there's a lot that can still be done to address how we manage this data. And part of the reason why we like to do these webinars is to not only look at the analytics and the research that's out there, but then also look at real-world case studies with what people are doing today in technologies and how they're leveraging those. And so that's part of the reason why I want to again introduce Lou again here to our webinar. in terms of talking about an analytics case study with Endo. And Lou is going to impart some of his experiences that he's had with the platform and how he's used sourcing and all the different capabilities he's used on Determine, and just give you his insight from what's been the best and what's been the most useful use of their time in terms of how they use the technology. So Lou, I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to you, and we're looking forward to hearing your story. So it's all you, Lou.
All right. Great, thanks, Constantine. I appreciate it. All right, why don't you go ahead and go to the next slide. All right, I wanted to start out by talking a little bit about who Endo is, because I'm not sure everybody on the call is familiar with us. But we're a global specialty pharmaceutical company in both branded and generic drugs, and some over-the-counter drug also. We came about in 1997 as a spinoff by some executives at DuPont Merck wanted to take certain products that DuPont was going to sell, and they bought the rights to those products and started up Endo, and we've been rolling along ever since. We have multiple locations in the United States, Mexico, South Africa, Canada, Ireland, India. We've done a significant amount of acquisitions lately, which has expanded our stretch over the world, and it's also kind of highlighted to me the importance of analytics, because when we're integrating these new businesses into Endo, we need to also integrate the spend from their history into ours, so that we can have a better idea of the vendors, the suppliers they're using, the spend they're having, and how we can leverage that to get better deals conceivably with some of the other suppliers. Go ahead to the next slide. All right, Endo's been using Determine since 2011. It's one of the first things I did when I got here was start a project to come up with we were looking for a sourcing and spend tool. We found Determine, and one of the things I really liked, and it was highlighted earlier in the presentation, is the fact that all the modules had the ability to talk to each other, and I thought that was key, because we use all the modules. We use the sourcing module, the supplier information, contract, supplier management, and the analytics. And it was key to me that we could move that data from those different modules into the analytics tab. The two that we probably use the most are supplier management and the analytics tab, and thirdly, we probably use the sourcing the most. As a matter of fact, we currently have about, due to the most recent acquisition we have about 72 sourcing events that we're going to be kicking off very shortly. Some of them already have, but we'll be having a couple of waves in the next couple of months through the summer. So we're going to be using the RFP, RFX sourcing module quite extensively coming up. But right now our focus is on supplier management and managing the risk. And I think the way to manage the risk of the suppliers is to use the analytics tool. I have quite an extensive background in banking, credit card banks, Citibank, Bank of America, and one of the things that banks focus on for third-party relationships is risk. And you can see the different types there that the OCC bulletin spells out. I mean, operational, compliance, reputational, strategic, and one I forgot is contract risk. If you want to see the definitions, I highly recommend Googling that bulletin, looking in the appendix, and it has all the definitions that the OCC uses, but I think they absolutely apply to other businesses and not just banking. I think anybody that manufactures a product or sells a product has a risk of having any of these risks, so to speak. So I think it would be well worth your time to take a look at that. Currently, Endo's using supplier management to develop scorecards and tier our suppliers. We have a template where we answer a series of questions which automatically tiers our suppliers, tier 1 being the most critical suppliers. We're trying to keep the tier 1 suppliers to a manageable number, because obviously our model dictates that we have supplier relationship managers, and that's usually not a full-time job for them, so we have to make some hard choices about who our tier 1 suppliers are and manage them that way. Next slide, please. This is the slide I'll probably spend the most time on, because we are using the analytics page for a number of things, and I think it's key that we talk about a lot of these. We have spend data coming in from all the companies in Endo International. We get it on a quarterly basis. We have, I believe, last count, maybe 32 different feeds from our ERPs, from our T&E systems, from our P-card systems, from our credit card, our T&E card systems. Awful lot of data coming in, and IASTA helps us, or Determine helps us manage all that data and into a reviewable process that we can then use it. We break it down in a number of different categories. We're using commodities, so we separate our data between sourceable, non-sourceable, and then sourceable becomes broken down into things like direct corporate services, indirect sales and marketing, IT, R&D, and others. So we have a lot of different ways to slice and dice the data depending on what we're looking for. I just talked a little bit about the category analysis, but the sourcing project summary details, we have the ability to break down all our sourcing events by sourcing manager, the timing of them, what step we are in each one of those, and what the results and the savings potentially are. Of course, I think everybody on the call is probably familiar with RFXs, RFIs, RFQs, etc. We build those in IASTA. We build the templates. We use those. We've done some reverse auctions, but we tend to keep all that history, obviously, so we can go back and refer to it when we do another sourcing event, maybe in the same category of commodity. So it's very key that we build those things, and Determine allows you to do that in a very, I think, simple and easy way. The contract data is probably the system that we neglect the most, unfortunately. We have another contract management tool that the legal department uses, so this is kind of I'll say, non-authorized contract data system that I like to use because the sourcing managers can get to these contract data information a whole lot quicker than they can get it from the legal department. So we have a tendency to keep them in two places and put a lot of our contract data into the Determine tool, and I think that's worked out for us very well. As I mentioned, we're doing scorecards, and we're doing a lot of different things with scorecards. We are tracking the data from a couple of different standpoints. Some kind of general categories that we're looking at are cost, and we have a number of things under each one of the things I'm going to go into. We're tracking cost, delivery and support, flexibility and ease of doing business, partnership and innovation, quality, and the big one, risk and compliance. So we have a lot of components to our scorecard. We have not yet decided whether we want to share all that information with the suppliers, because I'll say we've probably been doing scorecards now for about 6-8 months, and we're waiting to get some clear trends before we start sharing data with the suppliers. One of the other things that some of the folks that work for me love this analytics tool for is the supplier diversity and diversity reporting. When we set up a supplier, we set up also the minority code, if there is one, in our system, so that when we get the spend data, we know exactly which component or multiple components of that we can track these suppliers for. Now, since we have federal contracts, we have to report to the government on an annual basis about meeting our supplier diversity goals. We have certain spend dollars in a number of goals that we have to hit, and this tool allows us to track that data very easily. Before we set this up in Determine, it would take us probably 2 to 3 months to compile the data in 1,000 Excel spreadsheets and then distill it down into the point where we could then fill out the form that the government wants and send them the data. And believe it or not, that 2 to 3 months now takes us about a week. So that was a significant increase in the amount of time that the folks that do this were reduced, and now they can spend their time on actually finding suppliers that we want to send an RFP to increase our diverse spend, and also monitoring just the marketplace. We've also, and we talked about this a little earlier in the presentation, we just recently incorporated a risk management tool into my analytics page from Dun & Bradstreet. I think it's a great tool. I am going to work with them to get it to be automatically sent into the analytics tab, but right now it's a manual process where I actually send them a worksheet to update the scores, and I'll show you that in a minute on the one-stop page. Also, recently we've had in our manufacturing area, we've had some issues in the warehouse where we're getting having some problems with freight carriers and certain things that come into the receiving dock. So we've set up a tab for them to use to track the issues from the freight carriers. Like, for instance, if the pallet should be wooden and it's plastic, or if the pallet height is over the limit, or if the barcodes are not on the outside of the boxes, or there's a whole number of 42 different issues that, believe it or not, cause this problem on the receiving docks. So now we're going to be able to track those and add them to the supplier scorecard and go back to the freight carriers and say, okay, during this time period, you had X amount of issues, and this cost us X amount of dollars in rework. And we're thinking very seriously about charging the freight carriers and/or the suppliers back for those issues if they don't. And it also gives us an opportunity to tell them what they need to fix. Believe it or not, some people make deliveries, and it's something I found out I didn't realize, that they have to schedule the deliveries with the receiving dock. And some people still show up without appointments, so to speak, and it makes it very difficult for everybody to get their shipments delivered when that happens. Probably the crowning glory of this page is the supplier, what I call the supplier snapshot, or the one-stop shop page. And if you go to the next slide, I'll show you what that is right now. This is what I like to consider the senior management page, and I know it's blurry for a reason, because there's a lot of data on here, and some of it's proprietary, so hopefully you can't read too much of it. But you can see how we've done some components of the scorecard and those RPM dials. So it gives us an overall score there. You can see our quarterly spend. This is an overall page. We can drill down by supplier and have each one of these components just give us that one supplier information. So there's contract details, which tells us when the contracts are coming up and how many we have. There's a number of suppliers, a minority description, the company. There's the D&B information is at the bottom of the page. There's a number of scores and risk scores, and then a kind of a key as to what those mean, because not everybody would be familiar with some of the scores. And these are proprietary algorithms that D&B has come up with to predict financial stress or other kinds of stress on a supplier. And in addition to this, I usually get, when there's a problem when the supplier changes a significant amount, either up or down, I get an automatic email from them alerting me to potential issues with a supplier or the fact that somebody is now kind of on the upward trend. So this page took a lot of work to get a lot of time with the folks that determined to come up with this, and I think it's going to be a very popular page with our senior execs. I've showed it to some of them. They really like it, but it's not been widely used at this point in time because they're still trying to tweak it and get some, get set with which data we want to show people. And with that, I will turn it back to you, Constantine.
Thank you, Lou. Thank you for that presentation. That's a great example of, again, some of the challenges that Endo has encountered and how they're then managing that with technology. And to continue that discussion then on the analytics side, I'm now going to turn this over to Bill DeMartino to kind of talk a little bit about our perspective on this technology, what we've seen, what we have, and kind of where we think things are going from the analytics point of view. So, Bill, I'm going to turn this over to you.
All right, great. Thanks, Constantine. You can drive forward. So what I wanted to do today was get a little bit tactical and give you insights into the experiences that we try to summarize looking across our customer base. So given a broad range of customers who've been adopting analytics across the source-to-pay continuum for the last 15 years, and looking at the journeys that they've taken and what decisions they made in terms of what type of analytics to institute and make available to their teams, and at what point in their maturity curves. And I really tried to just simplify that to give you guys a framework for thinking about where you are and where you might want to go next. And as we were doing that, this is actually a set of information here in terms of supplier-centric, collaborative, integrated intelligence that actually Constantine has been beating into my head since I started with Determine close to 2 years ago. And this is really, I think of it as a somewhat of a really glossy level summary of a lot of the information that we heard from Andrew in terms of the pressures that are acting on you all today. But as I think about these pressures, and what we wanted to do is think about the implications from an analytic perspective, because obviously we can't operate in the business without the analytics to support and measure what we're trying to improve. And that's ultimately what I think some of the big drivers are to making this happen. So as we go through these next couple of slides, we're going to try to associate those words to what we're seeing and what's happening. So in terms of this path, we see the path of analytics is very much echoes or mirrors what we typically see in terms of how customers are adopting our solutions. So when we think about the typical path of an organization or someone who comes to Determine with a set of challenges, usually they have challenges that tend to be point challenges or a set of points that need to be fit together to solve a specific business objective. And over time, they'll go through a maturation and seek to solve bigger and more challenging processes and data problems. And along with solving those, they have to think about master data management, and they have to think about integrating both at the data and the process level. So we'll be talking about that as we go through this. So the first implementation of analytics is typically what I would call a siloed approach. So I've got a sourcing solution. I'm going to operate analytics on that sourcing challenge and give me visibility. I'm going to be able to see all the requisitions and purchase orders that were created inside of my system, but that may not give me full visibility to all of the spending that's going on, because that's only for those that are buying through a compliant process, as an example. So that's usually the first type of visibility. The next shift is then into what I think of as supplier-centric. So this is really how can I bring together other information. And the next shift then is about really getting beyond just viewing common information and into the value of integrating both data and process to form what I think of as value-added capabilities. And this last area here is really what we're seeing really on the cutting edge with our customers. This is in the area where we are, I would say, doing some experimentation. We are in some beta activities in terms of where we go with this, and I'll give you a little peek into that. Quickly, I apologize for some of the numbering issue here. So moving us forward, Constantine. So in terms of this next, I think of as stage 2 of the development, moving from a siloed view to what I call the supplier-centric view, really the key here is the desire to have visibility across multiple processes for a single entity. And the entity tends to be the supplier. Sometimes it could be the contract. Typically, in order to enable this, you either got two ways of doing it. One is to move to a common platform, and by moving to that common platform, you then kind of have a single or common definition of the entity that you're reporting on, either the supplier or the contract. If you don't have a single solution, then you're faced with a master data management challenges, which is how can I take these different definitions of the supplier entity from across my silos and normalize them in some way. So those are really the two different paths towards achieving this level of visibility. And once you get that, though, what you have, I think of, is a dashboard or snapshot view of independent data shown together. And clearly there's a lot of value from being able to achieve that. And this is one quick example of how that can happen with spend, performance metrics, and contracts associated with the supplier in this case. So a little bit of a different view than the one that we saw from Lou, but getting to the same concept. Now, as you think about the next potential stage of maturity, and again, these probably aren't straight lines of maturation, but the next level of complexity or achievement is when you start thinking about how can I combine not just a single view of the data, but how can I actually leverage and integrate the data in the processes more intimately so that I can achieve a level of insight, a level of confidence and clarity in what I'm trying to accomplish, more so than what was previously possible. So here's a couple of examples. So one is the idea of actually measuring compliance. And there's different levels and definitions of compliance. One metric or one way of doing that is to integrate your contract data into your purchase order process, right? So that means I need to tie the idea of the contract at a line item or at a purchase order level and associate that with spend. Now, that gets me to a certain level of visibility and definition of compliance. Some people say I can't quite do that, so instead of doing it at the purchase order level, I'm going to do it at the supplier level. So depending upon how mature your processes are, you can shoot for different approaches. A second example of this type of analytic is savings tracking, and that is an area of much angst across many customers and prospects that I've talked to over the years in terms of defining what is and what isn't savings. But one definition of savings is looking at it from a sourcing perspective, right? And how can I tie the savings that I identified in my sourcing event, looking at historical spend or potentially looking against market trend data, how can I tie those savings numbers to my actual transactions so that I can come up with a number that my finance group will actually buy into, right? So that's another example of how I can start building organizational buy-in to what procurement is doing when I'm able to tie my different processes together. Okay, Constantine, and you can build this one out. So this is similar in tone to one of the slides that Andrew had in terms of what is it that's on the cusp of leading edge analytics for the supply management or the procurement team. And as Andrew talked about, there's a lot of different sources of information, and the point I wanted to make here is not only is there a lot of different sources, but there's a lot of different ways of combining those sources. So I don't want to say that it's a limitless opportunity here, because certainly there's some number of permutations that are bounded out there from a mathematical perspective. But as you think about tying together these various sets of information in new and unique ways, there's a lot of different ways to go with this quote-unquote big data challenge as we apply it to the domain that we're all working in and day out. And so our challenge as a service provider is to find the big ticket ones that are going to help you guys to achieve success rapidly and obviously continue to evolve that over time. So this next slide gives a couple of examples of some of the areas that we're actively pursuing, what I think of as a more prescriptive approach to analytics. So as opposed to me using the tool and seeing what it says, the idea here is to leverage all of this big data so that I can actually get ahead of the curve and the system can prescribe some opportunities for me to impact the organization. So two examples here. So the first one is what I think of as replacing the management consulting company. So, hey, I know that I've had some success in the past, and I know I've got opportunities in the future. How can I take all of that information about my past successes, about this current state of my contracts, and some of my spending patterns, and how can I leverage that to make suggestions for what should be my next wave of sourcing events? So that's one area where we've worked with a number of customers on. And the second one is an area that we think is going to be really, really exciting as we look at our customers that are utilizing our procurement platform, our e-purchasing platform, and across the P2P solution set. And we think we've got a real opportunity to help them to buy smarter. And there's lots of ways of doing that, and this is just one illustrative example, which is taking the idea of combining external information in terms of price trends and market volatility, seasonality, combining that with my current levels of inventory, be that from an MRO inventory perspective or what's in the closet next door, and helping the user to figure out, well, potentially you've got some room here to think about this buying decision, and there might be an opportunity to either accelerate that future buying activity or to slow it down, and maybe achieve a level of savings that you thought was not there at your fingertips. So again, lots of opportunities for how we tie this data together, and these are just a couple of examples. All right, and I'm going to wrap it up here and hand it back to Constantine so we have some time for questions. The overall message here is clearly there's a set of analytics that can operate across your source-to-pay continuum, plugging them in as necessary as you grow, and making sure that you've got the right data at your fingertips at every step of your process. So back to you, Constantine.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you for that for introduction into the determined analytics aspect, and basically sharing, kind of how these things can be done in terms of managing analytics and what we're doing proactively with some of our customers. So with that, as Bill mentioned, I'd like to open this then up to the panel and see with the questions, as Lori had mentioned earlier in the webinar, to see what kind of questions are out there. And there's a few that are out there that I want to address. I know that we sometimes get more than we can handle, so I want to make sure that we give adequate time to those in a number of different formats. So one of the questions was for Lou here. Are you using the analytics for direct and indirect spend? I think you shared that during the webinar, right, Lou? I mean, you mentioned both. I just want to clarify that.
Yes, we are using it for both. As I mentioned, we break some of the spend into both non-sourceable and sourceable, and then the sourceable is broken down between direct, indirect, but a number of indirect categories, but also direct.
Okay.
So yes, we're using that extensively for the direct.
Okay, awesome. Thank you for that explanation. Another question came here for Andrew with regard to one of the slides. It said, can you explain this redirect and pressure to deliver more savings? I thought savings is always a requirement for procurement. So maybe you could shed some light on that slide with the downward trend slide. I think that was the one that you showed, Andrew.
Sure, absolutely, right. So let's put a time context on this, and let's also start by saying that savings is still the top pressure. But there are more things in the mix for the average CPO and procurement organization. But if you were to go back to 2009, right, sort of the height of the global recession, the Great Recession, 9 out of 10 CPOs were pressured to deliver savings, and by and large, those organizations stepped up, and we've seen a series of benefits as a result of that. But as we've moved away from those tougher times, and as organizations have focused in on growth, on revenue, on innovation, the pressure to deliver savings has reduced as procurement organizations are pressured to derive more value from their data, to become better collaborative partners, to reduce risk. And so it remains a top pressure. It's just not as superlative, or it's not as differentiated as some of the other things. And again, part of that's tied to, we believe, the business cycle, and the part of that is also tied to procurement getting better engaged with the organization and better communicating the value that it can deliver.
Okay. Thank you, Andrew, for that explanation. One of the questions that came across here was, I'm not quite sure if it's directed to Determine or if it's directed to Lou, because it may not apply to pharma, but it said, do you use this technology for REACH, ROS, and for conflict minerals, as well as for international trade compliance? So, Bill, I think we'll throw that one out there to you quickly, and then make sure Lou also understands that one.
Okay, yeah, sure. I'll start. So from a generic perspective, absolutely. I mean, the solution's able to track, any type of compliance that we're able to aggregate the data with. So if you think about the process that Lou talked about, which is marrying the supplier management aspect of the procurement mandate, so the process of collaborating with suppliers and collecting information, so all of that can be, so conflict minerals as an example, can be collected in association with the supplier, and then we can report on that via the analytic stuff.
Okay. All right. And again, Lou, from your standpoint, I don't believe you guys deal with conflict minerals from a pharmaceutical.
No.
Yeah, so
No, we don't. No.
And Reach Roche is more for manufacturing and for lead content and that kind of thing. So I think we're okay there. All right.
Yep.
So moving on to the next question. This goes specifically to you, Lou. You mentioned 32 sources of data. I imagine you had multiple languages, short text data. How were you able to standardize to do the look across the analysis, human cleansing prior to data load tool? And maybe you could explain the process that we go through with you guys.
Well, we don't have a problem with multiple languages. We do have a problem with multiple currencies, but I asked, I knew I was going to call you, I keep doing that. Determine is able to convert all our different currencies to U.S. dollars, so that when we're looking at the spend analytics, everything's in U.S. dollars. We have the raw data in the local currencies, but when we look at it from an overall standpoint, everything's been converted to U.S. dollars.
Okay, so that helps understand the currency issue versus, and then also the multilingual issue.
Yeah, we really don't have a problem with the multilingual issue. I mean, the data is coming out of the ERP, so the data is the data. The data doesn't really have, I'll say, a language per se.
Okay.
If we need to get into like the PO information, that sort of thing, we drill down. You know, we've never had an issue with understanding it if it's in a different language, but we're normally just looking at U.S. dollars in the supplier, so we don't always need to be concerned with the multilingual thing.
Okay. Here's another question with regard to savings, and in terms of the topic of savings that Andrew mentioned earlier. Pure savings from a vendor can increase internal costs, quality, assurance of supply, getting scarce product when it's on allocation. Are there major issues for Endo here? How are you managing this?
Well, in terms of, I'll say narcotics, there are quotas, so we can only, the DEA kind of decides how much of any particular schedule, I won't say Schedule 3 because I'll probably make a mistake. I'm not that involved with those things. But any kind of narcotic that we do buy, there is quotas on those. So we know ahead of time how much we're going to get from the, the DEA is going to allow us to buy. So we adjust our manufacturing accordingly. But that really hasn't been an issue in the past that I'm aware of. It's, pharmaceuticals is unique in that you can't really switch suppliers for certain things. Like we buy some finished product from third parties, and we buy raw materials and manufacture our own. The thing is, it takes 2 to 3 years to, I'll say, certify a manufacturer because of the drug-related requirements. So you can't just go out and say, well, that supplier is selling me X product for this, and I can get it cheaper from this guy, so let's go buy from them. That doesn't work like that. It'll take you 2 or 3 years before you can move over to that supplier because you got to certify the product. There's tests that need to be run. The government gets involved. So it's not as easy as just switching suppliers, where you might be able to do that in, I'll say, a normal manufacturing environment. You can price shop or whatever, but you can't do that a lot of times in pharmaceuticals.
Okay. Thank you, Endo. Thank you, Lou, for the Endo response, I should say. I'm going to go ahead then and kind of wrap this up, folks. I know, again, we get a lot of questions. We're not able to always address them. What we'd like to do is collect those and see if we can get answers back to those questions that were unanswered. But with that being said, I'd like to thank, again, my panel here of Andrew, Lou, and Bill so much for joining us today on this, very salient topic. I'd like to see if Andrew, you wanted to mention something about your CPI Rising Summit real quick.
Oh, sure. It's a short lead time for everybody, but if those of you who are interested found today's discussion of interest, our inaugural CPI Rising Summit is being hosted in Boston next Tuesday and Wednesday. Tickets are still available, a few passes. So check out the link there, and maybe we'll see you in town.
Okay, Andrew, thank you for that. And then also what we want to mention is that we also have a white paper that Andrew mentioned that his team is writing, Savings and Risk, the Rise of Analytics for Procurement, with the same title as the webinar. that we will be making available for all the participants on the webinar today that will be coming out in the next couple, I guess probably next week or so, and we look forward to being able to share this piece of research with you. With that, I'd like to say again, thank you for my panel, thank you for the team and the administrative folks for helping us out here from Citrix, and also to all of you for making these types of events possible for us. We're going to leave this last screen online here for you to take some names and numbers if you were interested in contacting either Andrew or Lou directly, or either Bill or just the Determined team in general. So thank you again so much, and we look forward to sharing future webinars with you folks in the future.